Hey, what's going on, guys? Dom the Movie Nerd here, and have you heard the good word? Game of Thrones is back! Well, not really, but the first official spin-off, House of the Dragon, is set to premiere next year on HBO, and that got me thinking about how Game of Thrones, the #1 most-watched show for a decade, just seemingly disappeared from the culture after that god-awful finale. And I wanted to find out why, which is why I'm proud to present the newest hit show from the Talkin' TV network, Talkin' Thrones, the new weekly show where myself and friend of the channel, Professor Pat Huber, get together to break down each and every single episode of this hit show. We've got focus character segments, we break down the lore, we go over some old reviews, all to get to the question of where did this show go wrong? It's a really fun time. You guys are not going to want to miss this. So head over to the Talkin' TV channel on YouTube and Spotify to check it out. We go live every Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Audio goes up the following Saturday. It's going to be a really great time as we once again battle it out for the throne. Today's episode of the Talkin' TV podcast, we're talking about yet another deconstructive superhero property that we were not at all expected to get or enjoy. It's kind of the gift of 2021 so far. We're talking about Jupiter's Legacy, a new Netflix property that is actually good. What is the occasion?
Yeah, man, I've read quite a bit of Mark Millar's work, and it's really cool to see a title that I never knew that he even was attributed to. That's pretty awesome. So I'm excited to talk about this one, man. I think we have a great show for you guys today.
Stay tuned. That Invincible was going to be this telling about superhero properties coming up, right? Just when we were complaining and bitching and moaning about how fucking awful WandaVision and Falcon and Winter Soldier are so far. And now we're actually getting superhero properties that are like actually testing the waters, right? Who knew?
Yeah, it's actually really refreshing because I was thinking for the longest time, I was like, all right, so Amazon is where I can go for my deconstructionist anti-superhero properties.
Right.
And it seems like Netflix, once again, does some. Every time you get mad at Netflix, they seemingly like they're like they know how to like get you to let them back in.
I've said this before, right? It's the Godfather 3 quote, right? Which ironically enough, I still find it hilarious. Also, the Godfather 3, the most hated Godfather movie, is the one that's the most quoted on The Sopranos, where it's just when you think they're out, they pull you back in. It's the definition of an abusive relationship with a streamer, right? It really is. Like, I've been saying this since day one, since we started covering them last year, and I still hold true to that.
Right, because it's like, I'm still really mad at them for how Ozark turned out. I'm never going to forgive them for Glow. But it's
Glow.
like
that is unforgivable. That is an unforgivable sin right there. And Mindhunter. Even though Mindhunter's in a really weird state, and like we'll get into that at some point. Like how they did that show dirty. Although that's kind of also Fincher doing it to himself because Fincher's too busy. But even still,
yeah,
like,
but they didn't help.
Netflix,
let's be honest.
They didn't help. Not one bit. Like, who lets the actors' contracts lapse? What the fuck? Who does that?
The only other time that happened was equally as detrimental to the show when they just for some reason were playing the waiting game with Steve Carell because they knew he was going to ask for more money around season 7 of The Office, so they didn't reach out first, and his management wasn't used to the fact that, hey, they usually reach out to us. Do they not want you back? Well, you obviously have all these other offers, and so it lapsed. I mean,
it's quite that's so hilarious to me how like an error in communication led to the star of The Office leaving. I feel like if that's not like an Office scenario right there, like I don't know what is as far as that goes.
That is so true. That's
literally something you would see on The Office. That's so funny.
That's a podcast for a different day right there, but that's an amazing realization.
Oh, that's so good. Oh, this is why I miss these types of podcast episodes. We haven't had this in so long, but welcome back to the Talkin' TV podcast, people. As you can see from the top, we're talking about Jupiter's Legacy, a show that, surprisingly enough, has not gotten the Netflix thing of like, oh, everyone's talking about it as soon as it drops, but that actually makes me happy, and we're going to get into that in a little bit, because I've said before, the things that get the most hype, like, immediately when they come out, 9 times out of 10 end up sucking. So I'm just really happy that for once, we've got a show that, even though it may have started off a little rocky, and I'll be one of the first people to admit, I watched that first episode when it dropped on Friday morning. I was like, oh no, what are we in for with that garbage-ass CW-looking action sequence? But I gotta say, after 3 episodes now. I'm 3 episodes into it. I gotta say, I'm kind of digging it so far, and as what it goes. Like, Chris, like, what were your thoughts, like, going into this as far as that goes, right? Just like kind of what you were looking at as far as like how this was gonna apply. I know you just watched Invincible, obviously, so like I know your thoughts. You always haven't been like, you know, we don't obviously have the same approach to everything, but like that's kind of like why we make such a good team as far as that goes, you know?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think superhero sickness exists, like I've said many times. I personally think I have it. Yet I also think superhero Stockholm exists because you know what I realized, Dom? We did our first variety episode on Friday night, and you asked me during that podcast. You said, "Hey man, what are some of like the shows you're watching that like you know we don't have room to talk about in the schedule?" Like before we hit the topic of Invincible, you asked me, and I was like, you know, I'm kind of rewatching Arrow to see if there's like. If now that I'm a mature film watcher, because I watched that pre-film school, pre-anything but wanted to be a professional musician, really, when film and TV was literally just to block out the mundane, right? And so I want to go back and sort of see, is there really a magic in that first season? Does my film eye sort of, you know, and all those types of things.
So wait, hold on, You're saying you had to go back, is what you're saying?
I had to go back.
I just wanted to make sure I got that. I just wanted to make sure I got that.
I had to go back, and I was thinking to myself, like, of all the shows to go back to, I picked a superhero show. And yeah. I'm like, hold on, aren't you...
That should tell you something right there.
I was like, aren't you the guy who, like, is constantly berating against superheroes? You have a podcast that isn't meant to be that, but you've kind of become that guy on the podcast.
Kind of. I didn't want to say it, but...
And so it's crazy. I think I have superhero Stockholm syndrome because I
really do. I'm starting to worry. I think you might have a problem. I'm like, Chris, you've been talking a lot of shit about superheroes recently, but the first show that you watch, like, kind of, forget Arrow, also just a new show, is the new animated superhero show. I'm like, what's going on here?
Well, Invincible, for me, I kind of considered, like, required watching because it's obviously become such an impactful show that we had to talk about it for the sake of our podcast. At least, like, at some point it was going to come up. But, like, I did think it was telling in my free time that I like turn on Arrow, another superhero show. I don't know what's happening. I feel
I mean, if it makes you feel any better, I've been watching the Justice League animated show whenever I actually have a minute to breathe where I could watch something not for the podcast. So I feel like I'm right in that boat with you.
Yeah, and so it's like I think I actually really do like superheroes. I just think I just want the interesting aspects of them that originally got me hooked reading hours of comics and, you know, back in like 2015, 2016 when, you know, I kind of like hopped on the whole like, hey, the superhero thing's like pretty cool and it goes deeper than just Marvel. I was one of those like not you know anti-culture because a superhero is still mainstream, but I wasn't quite on board with like the main bandwagon, but I tried. I went to see Civil War in theaters. I went to see, you know, the Spider-Man film, Tom Holland. Like I went to do all that and it just never gripped me as much as like these smaller stories. And so Mark Miller was one of those guys who like I was so against Marvel, but yet I felt compelled to read Old Man Logan because of everything I heard about it. And to this day, just so you guys know, like superhero comics aren't really in my top 10. Old Man Logan and Planet Hulk are the two only superhero comics, both Marvel, mind you, that are in my top 10. So there's no DC even in my top 10 comics. And that's my favorite
Planet
superhero.
Hulk, dope, by the way. Only reason, still to me kind of the thing that I hold against Thor Ragnarok is the fact that Planet Hulk is so dope. And Taika obviously is going to do what Taika does, but Taika put his own spin on it. And I'm like, that's cool, but that's not my Planet Hulk, you know? Like, that's not the Hulk, like, ripping people apart on it. Oh, come on.
Oh, yeah, it's
come
awesome,
on.
man.
Like,
that whole cast of characters
awesome.
he falls in with.
It's fantastic. I love it. And then how that leads to World War Hulk, I'm like,
I haven't read that yet.
Like,
I probably should.
How did we never get I'm like, honestly, I'm still mad at that Universal, the solo rights of the Hulk will never let us get a movie like that. Yeah. But also the fact that Marvel and Disney would never touch a story as dark as that.
And so that's the thing, you know, speaking about dark stories, I think that's why I've put on Arrow in my free time, right? We're going to come full circle here. I think that's why once I heard about what Invincible was, I had to just sort of binge through, you know, Made for Love probably quicker than my finals school schedule would have liked, just so I can get to that, because this is what I look for in superheroes, right? And it's the imperfections of the perfect, which these superheroes, they need to be humanized. And all too often in Marvel, I feel even when they try to, it's not to the extent where I can relate to them. Maybe Spider-Man comes close, right? Only because we've all been through high school and we've all had that, like...
I'll get to that, but
he's still very fantastical. And so this is kind of why I'm shocked I didn't, you know, when I was really into comics, circa 17, 18... I only really went with the more mainstream of Millar, and I never even touched Jupiter's Legacy. So basically, introductory thoughts. I think I have both superhero sickness and superhero Stockholm syndrome, and I'm really happy the show came about. It's not perfect. We'll get into that. But I'm enjoying it so far. So do you want to do like spoiler free now, or
yeah, definitely.
I feel like we kind of already were, but maybe to officially title it.
I mean, just as far as my thoughts going into it, like I said, I've been upfront about this since day one. I'm not as heavy of a comics reader as a lot of the other people who are obsessed with this stuff. You know, part of the reason why the superhero boom has taken such an effect is because it's taken such, I feel like, not an let's call it kind of like an underappreciated sect of just media consumers and boosted them to the mainstream. And now that the studios understand just what a money pit it is as far as the amount of people that are continuously willing to come out and watch this shit, kind of almost regardless of the quality, just because they're finally feeling some sense of validation as far as the thing that they love finally getting the proper treatment, right? I feel like that's part of the reason as to why we're experiencing the superhero sickness right now, and why that's so detrimental to people like us is because we're not people who are just going to shell out for the shit that we love. We want to see actually like good shit, you know, because the shit that I grew up watching, again, like I've said, is Disney and Pixar, which, again, with the exception of most of the things, I hold to a certain bar of quality, you know, Indiana Jones, the Dark Knight movies, the Harry Potter movies, the Lord of the Rings, all of those, I feel like, to varying degrees, I hold to a certain degree of quality, which is why, unlike all these other comic book guys, I'm not going to just shell out and immediately praise the new thing. Like, I'm like, nah, Umbrella Academy's fun, but it's got problems, you know? Fucking all this other shit that's come out. I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to praise the Snyder Cut as being the end-all, be-all godsend, but certainly I will give it credit where credit is due, you know? And I'm always willing to give a new thing that I've never heard of, you know, the benefit of the doubt, you know? Especially because most of the time, 9 times out of 10, those end up being some of my favorite stories. You know, Kick-Ass and Kingsman were both in my top 10s of the respective years in which they came out. You know, both just because of their crazy, funny, off-kilter edge, but also just because of, again, in those specific instances, right, because of the talent that was involved in them, right? That being Matthew Vaughn, who might be my favorite underrated filmmaker as far as that goes, because he's made 6 movies, and only one of them has been a dud, with that being the Kingsman sequel. Every single other one of his movies has been a hit. He made the best X-Men movie, still to this day, the best team-up X-Men movie, I should say. And as far as Mark Millar's work goes, I mean, it's really weird because I feel like a majority of his stuff from what I've read, it's always been like, oh, this is just kind of excessive and kind of like, you know, I'm going to hunker it into a term that I've kind of classified in a few more recent superhero properties we've gotten called gore porn, I'll call it, where it's just like kind of just gory for the sake of being gory, you know? But the thing that kind of already kind of caught my attention about Jupiter's Legacy, besides the fact that it's like, oh, cool, we're getting another kind of what could be a deconstructed superhero property we didn't really know based on the marketing from someone other than Amazon, you know? Like, I like Amazon and everything that they've been doing, you know, with their properties right now, but I definitely think that kind of Netflix has obviously been needing to play some desperate catch-up, you know, obviously, you know, since we're in year 2 of the streaming wars, and now for the first time in their entire run, they've had competition. And, you know, after how we kind of critically bashed the shit out of them last year, and obviously in the intro of this podcast, I was definitely like, okay, we need something new, you know? And I saw this trailer, I'm like, this looks incredible. Even by Netflix standard, this looks like it has like a step above the normal Netflix budget that has kind of been like indicative of their quality, you know? And not to mention the fact that the actual producer behind the show, I mean, not quite yet, we'll get into that, was Stephen S. DeKnight, who did the Daredevil, which still to me is the only good Netflix show that came out of that whole Netflix run of superhero shows, you know, of Marvel superhero shows. You know, Luke Cage came close. Jessica Jones had its moments. Iron Fist, I was never even bothering with that shit because I'm like, yeah, I don't need
like
that.
The first 13 minutes.
I'm like, I don't need to watch this. But it was definitely interesting, I will say, kind of getting the opening minutes of this first episode called By Dawn's Early Light. And this is the spoiler-free section, by the way. And you can imagine my surprise when I saw, wait a minute, these are like kids playing. And like, actually like, you know, get a kind of, you know, not kind of like the lecture, but like kind of being educated on like the principles of being a superhero. And we're kind of like getting back to the ideas of what being a superhero actually means to the people. And I'm like, oh my God, are we actually not going into this idea of, oh my God, all superheroes are inherently evil because all they are is like the representation of the mass corporatization of our lives, and why are we worshiping these guys, you know? And basically, like, as much as I love The Boys, the entire reason why The Boys exist is literally just to make fun of comic book fans and kind of question why it is that they like superheroes in the first place. All right, let's be honest with ourselves, right? That's kind of like the inherent nature of what The Boys goes for. So I guess already off the bat, what impressed me about Jupiter's Legacy is it's able to tell a different kind of a superhero story while at the same time not spitting on the idea of loving superheroes, if that makes any sense, you know?
Yeah, I agree, because I think it doesn't have the snarky or aggressive undertones towards the audience that The Boys has, and I think it also doesn't have that sort of, I'd say, what I think makes Invincible so special is how it goes to that next extreme that you couldn't get away with if this wasn't animated, because it'd be a little too realistic. Like, I think the realism is perfect for the cartoony aspect of not just the fact that it's animated, but the way the writing sort of shakes down in Invincible. It's a bit cartoony. It's a bit more, I'd say, fantastical, not really tangible of this earth, right? And so I think this kind of treads the line of also being not as far, let's say, to one side as those two properties are, but also not taking sort of the generic route that we've seen with Marvel over and over again. I do, though, think that this show, now that I've seen 4 episodes, does suffer a little bit, because it kind of makes you realize, like, budget is kind of half the battle. Because while I think the writing is already stronger than a majority of what I've seen from, like, the first halves, because I'm going to compare it to the first half, since that's all I've seen of what's happening on Disney Plus in regards to WandaVision and Falcon and Winter Soldier, the spectacle of it is very important when it comes to these types of shows and this genre of superheroes as a whole. And, you know, it's like, if we thought that there were some moments of Falcon that looked underproduced, just understand that you're kind of with this show because you're here for the writing first and the spectacle second. I think they know that. And that's why, at least where I'm at, the action has been very pivotal to the plot, not the other way around. You know, there's no opening Marvel sequence, guys, where it's like a random Falcon flying and fighting some terrorists just to establish the tone again. We can't afford that in this show. So if you like those types of things, this is not what you're coming here for. And so I don't want to give it too much credit, though, because I think the writing is still a little CW at times. But I think you kind of need to curb some expectations, and then you will begin to really enjoy this one, as I have. I'll let you riff off that.
Yes, I agree with that. No, I agree with that 1,000%. Like, I even said it in in my review of the first episode on guyatthemovies.com. Check that out if you haven't gotten a chance
plug.
yet. Humble brag, a subtle plug right there, I know. Is that the action already off the bat, I'm like, oh no. You know, like, it was very CW, it was very hokey. It definitely looked like one of those, like, typical CW Toronto shot things. I'm like, so I made it clear very off the bat. I'm like, if you are coming here so Toronto. It's so funny how we're so used to that now, and I hate to keep taking shots at our neighbors to the north, but it has become so apparent now in all of these superhero CW shows that we've watched over the last almost like 7-8 years now, that it kind of becomes like impossible to ignore when you see it and how obvious it is. But as far as that goes, the thing that I've always given Netflix kind of credit for is the fact that they kind of have this understanding, definitely, that the action is specifically the spectacle action, I'll call it. Because when it comes to, like, just specific choreography, like with martial artists and stuff, they're up to here. That's their apex as far as that goes. But with the special effects, that's when it gets a little hokier. And that's when it gets to be like, oh, now we're showing our budget, you know? Which I think another telling sign of this show specifically is the fact that, like, so much of the rest of the budget is extravagant, you know? Like, even by kind of Netflix standards, like the flashback sequences that we have, because just to kind of give you guys an idea of the show both simultaneously takes place in the present day, whatever year that is, you know, I'm assuming 2020 or 2021, and also flashes back to the 1930s because it's a double story, which is showing kind of this family that's had superpowers since the 30s, named the Sampsons, right? They're led by the father figure / leader of the group known as the Utopian. He's played by Josh Duhamel. The whole thing is that in the present day, you've got him trying to adjust his 2 children, and in this case, all the other descendants of all the other superheroes that have kind of popped up over the last, like, 80, 90 years now, in order to, like, make sure that they're ready to kind of inherit the next stage of superheroes, while at the same time it's showing an origin story in the 30s of how they went from, like, kind of these, like, Wall Street kind of like, you know, like captains of industry who were kind of really affected by the Great Depression, and how they kind of went on a journey of self-discovery on their own that eventually leads to them getting powers, you know, just as far as, like, the brass tacks of what the story is. But as far as kind of, like, immediately, like, what, like, kind of what's willing to get me past, kind of the hokey action, as far as the fact that Netflix is already putting like a lot of money into this and into kind of like the right places per se. Because I know we complained a lot about like kind of how Netflix utilizes its resources, where it's like, wow, they're willing to sink how much money into that stupid CG dog and monkey for Space Force as a fucking joke. But meanwhile, their superhero fight sequences still look like shit. Like that, like that priorities as far as that goes.
I think while they obviously have sunk a lot of money into this, I don't think it's enough, because while I do think they're nailing the period piece aspect, you can kind of. So I'll use this one scene as an example. It's the scene where our main character is sort of on the street, life is good, and everyone starts running away. And everyone's like, get to the bank now, withdraw your money now, because the Great Depression just hit. And one thing I noticed in that scene was it was very tight. There was no old cars driving by. There was only 2 cars parked to give you that, hey, we're in the 1920s.
Yeah.
They really could only afford those 2 cars. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, you're right. They can only afford that one spot for that one scene. They're like, okay, we only have a certain amount of time to shoot this. Let's go. They have that one street corner that they have blocked off on Toronto somewhere.
Yeah, it shows its hand. It does show its hand, but I think it's a testament to the filmmaking where that's not a big deal. It just kind of comes with the territory.
Right.
And I think when you're in a field that has the majority of the highest grossing movies of all times are Marvel. So it's like, okay, there's going to be a disparity here. You're going to have to brace yourself for that. I actually don't think that is what I would say is the negative of it. In fact, I think that it's honestly the way they're able to work with this budget is a testament to these filmmakers and what they're capable of and how effective they actually are able to be within their limitations. So I would give that as a huge prop to them, because my issues don't fall there. I do have issues, but while I have been noticing that and bringing it up, I just want like the audience to know like that's by means not a negative of mine. I just think it's important for people to realize so we can kind of decide, do I like Marvel for the writing or do I like Marvel for the spectacle?
For the spectacle. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I agree with that 100%. And another point that I wanted to bring up before we move on, as far as that goes, is in my review, I wrote that Netflix, again, has a really bad tendency of revealing their budget, because Netflix, for the most part, it really only takes people like us in order to notice like those specific scenes where it's like, oh, no, you definitely didn't have the budget in order to shoot that, But they definitely, I think it's safe to say they're most revealing of their budget during the action sequences. I've seen it in all the Netflix shows. I've seen it in the Umbrella Academy. I've seen it in pretty much all their shows that involve action in some capacity, right? The only time, like I said, that they really were able to pull it off was in Daredevil, specifically that first season. But their action sequences, specifically the more spectacle-filled ones, are always going to be the sequences that are going to show off the low budget. But for me, at least, what I'm willing to give this show props for, again, based off of what I've seen, because I've only seen 3 episodes so far, is kind of already how it's going for kind of a different element of the superhero storytelling, right? So obviously, again, we go back to, what's been going on with the superhero genre, which is the idea of what Spielberg said of where it went to the Western, where the Western genre was so big and was so oversaturated and it's every aspect of our lives that it kind of just, that by the time, that it quite literally became too big for itself and ended up kind of collapsing and just going away. And now, like, again, name one Western movie that people our age, like, know about that was made after, like, 1970.
Right.
Exactly. You can't name one, And while I definitely don't think the superhero genre is going in that direction, as far as just because the superhero genre, I feel like, has one thing that the Western genre didn't, which is the internet, which will always keep up some facet of the superhero conversation going, even after they eventually leave the mainstream pop culture status. But what I like that this show is doing, which again, even though I express kind of the differences between this and other shows, is the same thing that I've given praise to The Boys, Invincible, and Watchmen for doing beforehand, which is actually having the balls, and I'll say that, to take the ideas, again, that I will say that Zack Snyder, controversial filmmaker as he is, tried to do before DC just cut him out and be like, no, we can't have any of this thinking man's bullshit in our TV, in our movies. I will say that they are actually having the balls to go the extra step and being like, okay, why do we love superheroes? What is it that makes us look up to them, And doing it in a different way, in different ways, right? The Boys is all snark. It's all kind of putting them down, and it's all kind of like, why do you like superheroes, right? This asks the same question and is like, okay, we get that you like superheroes, but why? And it just balancing out kind of those themes of, having someone to look up to, role models, balancing out what role models kind of are in real life versus who they are as you perceive to be. The idea of constantly having to maintain that line. I know, obviously, again, because we've been so inundated with, I'll call it the gore porn aspects, that's kind of become a joke in and of itself, right? We love to laugh at Tony Stark coming out and saying he's Iron Man at the end of his origin story, kind of, again, puts all the Raimi movies that came before it to shame, where literally such a tremendous part of those movies was the fact that Peter Parker had to keep his identity secret to protect the ones he loved, and Tony Stark comes out and is like, hey, I'm rich, bitch, I don't give a fuck, So, the fact that Jupiter's Legacy is kind of bringing back some of those traditionalist elements, but not in like an overly corny, hokey way, the way that some of the more modern properties have kind of like gone out of their way to show, these things are stupid, why do they need them? It's like, I think that I'll say is at the end of the day, superheroes and comics in and of themselves, they've gone a long way, obviously, since their origin, but they were made for children inherently, And there's a reason why, typically, especially specifically me as well, why a lot of people typically gravitate towards more, not childlike, but more child-oriented storytelling, right? It's part of the reason why we love Star Wars, right? It's because at the end of the day, that is geared towards children. It's because we just get that sense of wholesome messaging, And I definitely feel like in today's day and age, we'll get obviously into the nitty-gritty of the show. I definitely think that's needed more than anything else.
Yeah, I agree. I think this show has, I'd say it leaves its CW-isms at the door in regards to the budget and sort of those things that the budget affects. Obviously, the action and the period piece aspects and the wardrobes and all that not looking the greatest. But that's fine, because I think what this show does do is sort of play to its strengths. And the strength is Mark Millar's approach to writing stories and comics. So I think we can move into our next topic, because I kind of want to start that one off. I feel like it's kind of progressing to the Mark Millar of it all. So if you're cool with it, I think, guys, let us know your spoiler-free thoughts in the comments below. Let us know what you thought of the show so far. Don't ruin it. We're not fully caught up yet, and be respectful to other people watching. But let us know where you're at. Let us know your thoughts. Leave a comment. Like this video. Subscribe to our channel, please. It would help us out a whole lot. Hit that bell so you can turn on notifications and never miss when we post content. We post content multiple times a week. We love doing this. We're here for you guys, and we hope that you will enjoy the rest of our clips of Jupiter's Legacy throughout the week. Now, Dom, Mark Millar, this is kind of where I wanted to go. So while I said in the last segment...
Yes, please, and talk to me, because like I said, you're the comics guy here.
Yeah. So while I said in the last segment, I think the budget and sort of the CW-isms leave their, they're parked at the door with the budget. I think it's crazy that, to sort of harken back to the spoiler-free section, we can ask these sort of questions in a Netflix series that is, a little rough around the edges in regards to the production value. And it's insane to me, because it's like, we have so many comics that are based off source material, but we don't abide by the source material. And so I'm going to be curious when I go and actually read Jupiter's Legacy, how much they took from Mark Millar or not. But I think it just shows like the indie world is so rich and willing to ask the questions that the mainstream isn't in any genre. And sometimes those are uncomfortable questions. Like, I won't, spoil anything, but we do deal with addiction in this show. And we kind of learn that, hey, even superheroes have, vices, and they're not perfect. And we sort of deal with family, and how, family sometimes, when in business, has to sort of, it might not be what's right for one family member, but it might be right for the business, which in turn is good for the family member. And we're dealing with these difficult, hard choices that just make Mr. Porcelain Tony Stark look a little less appealing when I go back and rewatch those films, as I inevitably will at some point in time. And I think it's when you have guys like Brian K. Vaughan and Mark Millar getting involved in film and TV, I think that's why, while their productions sometimes are messy, like when Brian came in on Lost, it was kind of around an interesting part in Lost, but also I think the writing and the richness of his what he brought to the palette was made for the two most interesting seasons 3 and 4. And then after he left, you can see the effect. So it's like, we have, and I'm asking you, like, we have this source material, and that's why I think Old Man Logan was so great, because we actually went by the source material for once. We didn't sort of take a character and then put our own Hollywoodization on it. We actually used something that was, like, pretty close to the comic. So it's like, why do we stray so far away from these comics when we bring these characters to the screen, when the few times we do it, it's interesting and beautiful?
Well, I find it interesting that you kind of brought up the Marvel of it all, because that's kind of part of the key to Marvel's success is obviously, again, that you had the whole corporatization of it, everything, where they literally base who their first character as the intro to the kind of what the thing that turned into the MCU based off of, which toys kids wanted to play with the most. But I definitely think also is the idea that when Jon Favreau was brought on to direct the first Iron Man, it was the fact that he legitimately took an interest in the Iron Man source material. And even though we changed a few of the locations and obviously the time period and the context, that first Iron Man movie was beat for beat almost an adaptation of the comic. And the fact that Stan Lee went out of his way to say that that Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man was one of the 3 best superhero castings ever, so I definitely think that goes to show as far as what happens, but that just goes back to adaptations, right? And kind of has kind of spawned this kind of weird, interesting discussion of at what point do you stick closer to the source material versus at what point do you stray away, and obviously bringing in the fandom of it all, that makes it damn near impossible to do anything where the fandom will literally hold the franchise, especially now, at gunpoint. It feels like it's yeah, you better get this, and this right, or else we will riot. And it's kind of gotten to the point almost a little bit where you're seeing a reverse effect of what happened back in the day, where back in the day, Hollywood would try to put its own stamp on these superheroes that it would get it so wrong because they were just kind of ignoring all the things that made those characters interesting. And now it's they're kind of abiding by it so much to the point where it's you're kind of taking away a lot of the experimentation and fun that makes it interesting. But what I like about what this show is doing, right, as far as kind of the experimentation of the whole Mark Millar of it all, right, is the fact that it's kind of doing what The Boys is doing, right? And kind of what Marvel did later on, I'm not talking about kind of the residual quality, but as far as just kind of the storytelling adaptation, which is that it's pulling, I feel bits and pieces from the origin and surrounding it around kind of the context of the day, as opposed to necessarily getting the entire adaptation right? And I think that's also, again, among many other reasons, what led to a big part of Marvel's success, and I think that's also kind of what's setting this show apart as well, is that even though this show is not directly holding a sign in front of your face the way other shows are, saying this is relevant, this is important, these are the trendy modern day issues that are the problems with today, it's definitely kind of bringing them up as far as that goes, but it's doing, again, if you ask me, what everything should do, which is it brings it back and it's about character, and and of the 3 episodes so far, I think the thing that I've loved so far that I've seen is that each and every episode has done such a good job of getting me invested and kind of wanting to understand more about these characters and about their struggles. I want to learn more about the Utopian. I want to learn more about his son and kind of their dynamic. I want to learn more about the villains, I want this quest that they're going on in the 30s, and as far as, to whatever, I'm not going to spoil too much, but I definitely think it's highly hilarious that we've brought up Lost twice in this episode, especially once we get into kind of, the inspirations behind for why Millar wrote the comic. But I definitely think that that this show is already doing, I think, what most, forget comic book adaptations, forget adaptations in general, just what most stories are doing well, which is having it be about the characters, having them be our gateway into this world, and allowing us to experience this world through their eyes, right? It definitely threw me for a loop, because I'm but then I took a step back, at first when I watched it, but then I took a step back and I'm holy shit, wait, this is how stories are supposed to go. I haven't gotten this story in so long. And once I kind of got past that, I was okay, I'm along for the ride now.
And I think Mark Millar does such a great job of working with the character on his pages, because when you read Old Man Logan, it's the thing about comics is you don't really know which comic is connected to the next, but there is sort of a general consensus when you have characters that have been in so many different varying runs and issues, like Wolverine, where you can sort of understand there are general character isms that all writers share in common. And so Mark Millar's ability to capture the feel of Wolverine in a different part of his life, but also add his own breath of fresh air, beg the questions of, hey, am I going to do more harm than good if I carry the mantle? Am I going to put others at risk as I'm aging? If I can't fully perform in a situation, am I going to let my fellow combatants down? It's really interesting stuff that we're able to ask here. And so I think his ability to insert those same sort of, I'd say, elegance, the same sort of elegance that he has in regards to tackling the issues of the superhero meet the real world, our reality, right? Not the comic book reality, but being able to pair the two it's so, I don't know, I think he's a very poetic writer in that sense, because at surface level, it's like you said, You don't need to take any real-world isms out of this unless you want to. They are there, but they're not beating it in your face. You know, I think at this point everyone knows what the problems are, and I think, thankfully, a lot of people want to fix them. But his ability to give you the choice to choose what level you want to engage with this property in is, I think, a testament of a great writer, where you can simultaneously watch this show as a rewatch just for comfort food, to see something you've seen again, to unwind, or you can rewatch the show and even go more analytical than we probably are right now. And while it's not a perfect show, I do think it's nice to get sort of these alternative voices in this superhero heavily saturated realm that we're in.
Well, I mean, let me ask you this, right? Did you read any of the Kingsman or Kick-Ass comics prior to or like right after the movies came out?
And I'm actually, I'm curious, did he create those stories and then they got adaptations?
Yes, he did.
Oh, okay.
Yes,
That's
he did.
cool.
Those were created like prior to the adaptations. And here's what I'll say as far as like kind of the poetic nature. That's why. It's because definitely I feel like Kick-Ass, I read more of Kick-Ass than I did with Kingsman. I didn't write all of it, right? But Kick-Ass, the comic, felt like it was like, okay, I'm writing this for angsty teen boys, you know, who like just want to see just violence happen to superheroes, right? And in this case, you know, Kingsman toned it down a little bit, but definitely like for, you know, like kind of the equivalent treatment for spies, right? As far as that whole thing goes. So like, that's why I definitely feel like in that case, those adaptations were needed, especially kind of with the kind of the treatment that Matthew Vaughn was able to do, because the thing that Matthew Vaughn, I think that kind of improved on the initial work is the fact that rather than have them be super angst-filled and super kind of like, you know, edgy, but not in like a good way, you know, more like kind of a cringe, like kind of attention-seeking way. I think that with those, he was kind of able to take them and transform them into more like pop-centered fun pieces, you know, that like does the thing of like kind of doing the, not glorified, but doing the rated R action without like kind of making it like excessive, if that makes any sense. You know, like when all the heads explode at the end of Kingsman, they explode in like fireworks, you know, as far as that goes. Like it's kind of like, it's being pulpy. It's taking like what's cringe and turning it into pulp, if that makes any sense as far as kind of that adaptation. But what's interesting about Jupiter's Legacy, the comic, is that it definitely seems to be like Millar's most mature thing. You know, again, like I'm not at all familiar with the majority of his work, you know, as far as, but I definitely think that he took a different approach, obviously, with the Old Man Logan thing of it all. And, I mean, the story itself, he even says, he says it's influenced by Star Wars, it's influenced by King Kong, it's influenced by Roman mythology, origin stories for the Golden Age of comics. So he's literally kind of doing who's the guy that wrote The Boys? I can't remember his name. It's not Eric Kripke, because that's the showrunner, but I can't remember the name of the comic book guy who wrote The Boys. Because that guy, right, whose name I'm currently forgetting, that guy wrote The Boys because he fucking hates superheroes, right? Because the whole thing is that, like, he had the Punisher. He wrote an arc for the Punisher where I think he felt like Spider-Man and the Hulk, and he made Spider-Man and the Hulk look like fucking jokes, you know, just because of how much he hates superheroes. Garth Ennis, thank you. Garth Ennis is a guy who does not like superheroes, and so he writes his stuff specifically for the purpose of showing just how awful superheroes are, right? That kind of is what leads to The Boys. Mark Millar, you can tell, does not have that same kind of approach to superheroes, right? He kind of still has, you know, as deconstructive, you know, and kind of as angsty as he gets, he still does have kind of like that admiration and understanding of what it is that superheroes kind of mean for people, you know? So I definitely think that as far as kind of getting back to the root of superhero storytelling, right? Again, what is it that we've talked about all the time as the inspiration for the Justice League, right? The Greek Pantheon, right? Quite literally where the Greek Pantheon plays a substantial part in the origin of the Justice League is the origin for Wonder Woman itself, right? So the fact that he's pulling from that, I feel like is kind of revealing as far as what he's trying to say, especially considering the fact that he's also getting into like socio-political and economic differences as well between different time periods and kind of like the end of the traditionalist sense of capitalism, you know, especially considering that I think it's very telling that he set half this story in the Great Depression, especially considering the fact that he wrote this. The main inspiration was almost the second recession that we experienced with the housing crisis in 2008.
Yeah.
You know? So that's part of it as well. And so I feel like all of those little things are very, very telling as far as where he's coming with what he's trying to do with this superhero series,
yeah, well,
you know?
I think, you know, I would almost say that he has more in common with Garth Ennis than you would think, because while Garth Ennis was sort of, I would say, obviously being, he was sort of, in a sense, I would say, protesting the modern pop culture zeitgeist with The Boys. But, you know, I think that Mark Millar takes these IPs, these, I'm looking through what he's written right now. Like, he wrote Civil War. He literally begged the question of what is right and wrong. He wrote Wolverine, Enemy of the State. He wrote Kingsman. He wrote Kick-Ass. I mean, I'm just scrolling through, and I'm seeing his approach. Old Man Logan. It's, to me, it says, I love superheroes, but I also see the complacency. And he kind of, whether he knows it or not, at least what he brings out in me as a reader, a comic book lover, he does what I want more creators to do, which is beg the question of how can we take these properties to the next level. And I think that's kind of what The Boys does in a way. Maybe it's almost self-defeating, because I think it asks for the best of the genre by being so exceptional in the genre it's in. And every time Mark Millar gets to write one of these big characters that's been, has a silver age and a golden age, he takes them and does something to them that no one before him has done. And it's not like writers before him haven't had the opportunity. How many times has Wolverine been written?
Right.
And so that's why it's so compelling to me that he's able to sort of beg these questions in the superhero genre. And that's why superheroes are compelling to me, because they're supposed to be the best in all of us. Yet, as we see, they struggle with the same things we do as well. And so that's why, when properties like this come around, especially recently, right, we've had, I'd say, the triple threat of, Invincible. We've had The Boys, and of course, adding to that batch, that's made me realize how much I love superheroes. Jupiter's Legacy. Now I'm going to go even harder, guys, on the whole asking Marvel to do better, because we're proving we can.
Most definitely. Especially since it's becoming so apparent now with their TV shows, kind of like the flaws in them, right? I feel like with the movies before, I think it was a sense of the spectacle, because, again, Marvel knows how to do spectacle, unlike no one else, right? The spectacle, I feel like, was so good that it definitely overrode, I'll say, a lot of kind of the more problematic storytelling elements. And I feel like now kind of that we're past Endgame, right? I mean, to do a quick sidebar on Marvel, and as far as my thoughts on that go, I definitely think that kind of part of the reason why the stuff post Endgame is not working and why Endgame ultimately works is because Endgame to me was the last thing that was actually about a character. And because at the end of the day, Tony Stark's sacrifice at the end of Endgame, say what you will about the entirety of the movie itself, Tony Stark's sacrifice at the end of Endgame provides a form of resolution that really kind of nothing in Marvel had ever really provided in that sense before, It provides a solution. It provides an end cap, It provides kind of like a finality to that story, When they could have so easily just made that, this is just, we're just setting this up for the next one, and this is only going to feel temporarily like an ending, It's the fact that, I guess, kind of when people talk about that as an ending, that's kind of what they're talking about as far as that goes. It was the first actual, kind of meaningful thing that Marvel did, as opposed to just, kind of having everything be light and fluffy that just sets up for the next thing, And I feel like with the TV shows and the one movie that came after Endgame, because I'm including Far From Home in that batch too, it's definitely kind of showing of their hands of all that finality you got? Just kidding, So I definitely think as far as that goes, that is kind of starting to reveal some more of the problems with Marvel. And before we move on to the next thing, I definitely think that, it definitely, this is foretelling to me that, the genre that I was certainly starting to get sick of, and that I was certainly starting to question whether there was anything more interesting you could get out of this. It just shows, they still got more to go, and there's still thousands of more interesting and compelling stories that they could tell within this, So just so you guys know, of course, be sure to check out the rest of our channel. Obviously, click the subscribe button, click the bell next to it. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Talking TV Podcast. Now, Chris, I kind of wanted to take the next two sections that we had and kind of roll them into one. Only because I feel that they kind of lend themselves more to it, as far as kind of we talked about kind of our spoiler-free thoughts, and now I want to talk about obviously some of our spoiler thoughts, and but also kind of how it lends itself to where the show could go, right? Because I've only seen 3 episodes, you've seen 4, right? And I'll definitely say that where I left off, it's definitely still in the setup range, obviously being introduced to the character, ironically enough, I don't know if you recognize that guy, but the character portrayed by Matt Lanter, famously the voice of Anakin Skywalker in the Clone Wars.
Yeah, Nick, right?
As George Hutchins. Yeah, as George Hutchins, who's revealed to be Sky Fox, right? And I definitely think they'll kind of everything that they were doing with that character, I'm this might be the most complex and interesting villain setup origin story that I think we've ever gotten, And I definitely think that the back and forth between the past storyline versus the present day storyline is probably the best in that specific episode, as far as kind of sets up the guy who was eventually revealed at the end to be his son, and then kind of how they're kind of trading back and forth, where when you meet George, he's not like a villain immediately, but he's got all the signs that could lead to him being a villain as far as that goes. You know, when already that off the bat is setting this up to be like, oh, okay, this is like really, really interesting. And like, you know, as far as where this could go, you know what it is? It's the complete opposite of Falcon and Winter Soldier in the sense of where like, Falcon and Winter Soldier, like, kind of prided itself of being, like, a movie, but then certain of their episodes would just drag out with these boring-ass plot lines that were so unnecessary that I just didn't care about, you know? This is kind of taking that concept, right, that we talked about previously, right, of a pilot season as opposed to a pilot episode, but I feel like it's doing everything right in that sense, because for the first time in a while, on a streaming service, I've gotten a show where I'm actually, like, every episode, I'm like, I want to take my time. I want to actually get to know each and every element, because this is going to have important story elements that build into the next thing, as opposed to like just having to be something that I'm like, yeah, I just want to binge this all and get it over with and forget about it, right? So it's interesting because for that being Netflix's approach for a majority of their content, how they're finally taking the opposite approach to that. You know, I wanted to know your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I certainly think it's compelling. I think that they really have no choice but to be a little more story focused and make sure that's ironed out. Again, the budgetary restraints showing their head. And I think maybe having a positive cause of effect, because, I mean, what else can you really do when you're in this type of situation, you know? I think they understood that the action was never going to look the way they wanted. And so I think it's actually boasting very strongly in this show's favor, because one of the things that I find so compelling so far is the character dynamic and how equally the flashbacks seem as strong, if not stronger and more compelling than the present day, which is awesome because sometimes flashbacks, they get a little CW-ish. They are a little more, you know, okay, it's something different because you need a B shot because that's what we've become accustomed to as film watchers. But thank God.
Especially when it's a period setting,
exactly.
too.
Thank God they're strong and they're good because I'm really enjoying them. And so I think to sort of talk to the George Skyfox situation, he is so great because, you know, we're talking about pilot seasons a lot on this show recently. And if you look at The Witcher, I would say that is a show that I love for biased reasons, but as a critic, I can go ahead and say I disagree with the majority who love that show. I didn't really get much out of the first season. Yeah. It was messy, it was contrived, and I don't use that word lightly. And so origin stories are important in superheroes, and I think you can get away with the pilot season being an origin story, but it has to be a damn good origin story. And thank God I can't wait to read this comic because I want to be able to say that, like, my hunch is correct. And my hunch is that we're really sticking true to the pages of Mark Millar's work, because this origin pilot season, while we don't have a central villain yet, while it's really sort of characters, more of a drama rather than an action series, it's compelling and it's really good. Yeah. And I think it's because where we can go with this is a place of heights that is going to be really, really refreshing. Now, the one thing I will say is Netflix has not confirmed this yet for a season 2. However, it's their only other original superhero property outside of the Umbrella Academy, and I'm sure they want to compete and be players. So I think they're just kind of letting the initial buzz die down, and then they'll hit you with like another resurgence of marketing buzz with the season 2. I'm sure season 2 is coming, if not already being worked on. So
well, I mean, what marketing buzz?
My thoughts so far, because then I do want to get into some of my negatives. I do think, hey, what I learned from this so far is pilot seasons aren't all that bad. I think there was a right way to do it, and I think really it's when you're talking about TV, which is what I think separates TV from movies, characters are a little more important in TV because you're spending way more time on them. Like if you look at a movie like The Revenant, stunning, beautiful, awesome movie. There is great character development, but I don't think the character development is stronger than, let's say, the cinematography or the subtext. I think it all meshes together in that film to create a perfect, beautiful culmination that was an Academy Award-winning picture. But I think that's a movie that can get away with a little less development from Leo because of the medium that it's being told in, whereas this, already having budgetary limitations where we can't rely on spectacle to make up for shitty writing. I mean, sorry, spectacle for shitty writing. Thank God the writing isn't shitty. So
yeah, it is. Go ahead and say it. Yeah. I said it first. Look, to me, the only 2 well-written episodes of Falcon and Winter Soldier are those middle 2 episodes that were written by Derek Kolstad, because he actually knows how to write. Now, I'll agree with you 100%. The only spot where I'll disagree with you on is where we're not really introducing the central villain yet. I think we have. I think it's just a matter of they just done such a good job of keeping him in the background that we don't really realize it yet, so that when he does come out, it's going to be like,
But do you think
boom,
we've met him as
you know?
a villain yet? Because I don't.
Yes, I think we have. We just don't realize it yet because that's how good they are at keeping it in. Because everything to me as to like how George was portrayed in his intro episode, I'm like, oh, this is our villain. I understood immediately just from the way that they introduced him, just kind of like the different edge that we had, and even in the brief cameo that he had in episode 2, I'm like, oh, this is absolutely
So then let me
our
throw
villain,
a plug-in of my own, since you threw a plug-in earlier in an earlier clip.
All
We're
right,
covering this Friday night,
absolutely.
guys, on our variety stream of the week you're watching this, and you can also go back and check it out on our channel. So let's find out where I stand on this, because right now I'm digging my heels in and saying
We
I
shall.
do disagree with Dom, but this is obviously going to be a point we bring up on that
All right.
show. So
We'll see. Obviously, again, I mean, it could also just be my Matt Lanter bias because to me, no offense to Hayden Christensen. I am always sympathetic towards stars who get completely screwed over by just terrible fan reaction to something that was ultimately not their fault. But Matt Lanter is my Anakin Skywalker, you know. So like, I'm always again just bringing back that Clone Wars bias. I'm always gonna have a little bit of that Clone Wars bias. But yeah, so you talked about your negatives, right? So definitely get into some of those. I want to see if they kind of line up with mine.
yeah, I think we're spending a little too much time in the origin story. I think we need to pick the pace up a little bit. I love the questions we're asking, but I think we kind of understand where all the characters are coming from, and at least where I'm at 4 episodes in, really the backstory is starting to give me more development and pushing me forward rather than the present day, which is just more of the same. It's compelling and it's interesting if you like the characters, but we're at the halfway point, at least where I'm at, and I'm really not trying to spoil it for you, so I'm going to be vague. It's just...
No, I get it though, because that was kind of like my worry going into the end of episode 3. Where I'm like, yeah, these flashback sequences are awesome, but these present day sequences are kind of feeling a little less succinct.
Yeah,
as
and
we
I
go
find
on.
it always concerning in shows as someone who is becoming kind of experienced with like dissecting these things on an episode to episode basis. It's concerning when the flashback, or I guess to reference back to Lost, the flash sideways is more compelling than the A story, and that's starting to happen a little bit. And I just hope we can recover and land on our feet, because it only really started to show its head halfway through episode 3, but we're about an episode and a half in now, and the pace hasn't sort of flipped back to where it's most compelling, which what drew me in about the series, because I texted Dom, guys, after episode 1, and I said, I don't know if I'm going to like this. I'm going to stick with it. As always, I try and be as objective as possible. I give every episode a chance when I know we're covering something the whole way through. But I said it kind of feels a little Friday Night Lights-ish. But then I kind of thought to myself, maybe that's a good thing, because the action sequence was a bit concerning. And so that won me over, and I'm okay with it now. I'm okay with the drama. A little more Riverdale, a little less Falcon and Winter Soldier.
Right.
But Riverdale, not in an insult. It's just, it has CW isms. But I am concerned at this point in time.
We got to talk about that at some point where we talk about like trashy shows that we love, because trust me, I got that too. I will defend True Blood to the death, even though that's a terrible show.
I hadn't brought up Riverdale in a while, and I had to bring it up again. I do love that show. And so the last thing I'll say is, before I hand it over to you to sort of, combat maybe or chime in on my critiques, I do think budget has showed its head once again, where outside of the leads, the performances get a little iffy.
Yeah.
Kim's Convenience cameo, though. I don't know if you noticed.
Yes. Oh, wait.
You remember when Janet is going as the moniker Janat? And she's like sneaking into the film festival. She's pretending to be a Korean immigrant.
Yes,
the security guard who let her in.
I do remember that. And then the African girl who lets her in.
So that's cool. She's in that.
Oh wait, is she the one girl who's the daughter of the guy in the wheelchair?
She's the one who's with sort of that, which we don't really know what they're doing yet. The guy who has the time stick where he can like travel wherever he wants. That sort of like rogue crew.
Oh,
with the curly hair.
her?
Yeah, that's her. So that was cool. And
okay.
that just.
Oh, that actually is kind of cool. I would have put that together.
That's why I didn't even have to look up the Canadianisms of it, because once I saw her.
Keeping the Kim's Convenience element alive. But yeah, once you see it, you're like,
Canadian
Toronto, right there.
Yeah, what's your take on everything I just said, though?
No, yeah, I agree with it 100%. Like, I'm an episode behind you, so I can't really comment on that yet. Oh, and I guess only because the flashback sequences I'm enjoying so much, but I will definitely admit, I think that certain episodes of the 3 that I've seen so far have done a better job as far as balancing out kind of like the backstory with the present day, as far as, doing the connections. And I'm hoping, right, because I've seen this done, like, really well only once. It was this show called Homecoming that came out a couple years ago that has kind of come and went with Julia Roberts, but that show did this really interesting thing of having these two different coalescing storylines, right? One in the present and one in the past, and they all kind of like, once they come to a head, they smash together in a really, really interesting way, and I'm hoping that this show does that and does not pull a Lost as far as kind of, where the backstories, when they kind of start to come to a head with the present day, they kind of like really weirdly mix and intermingle in a way that kind of makes the show messier by default. I'm hoping the show doesn't do that, but already the fact that this show clearly has an island that's part of the show's, or that's part of the superheroes.
There's an island, there's an object that spins in the shape of a windmill, and I don't know.
They have scenes that they have to put their hands in order to like set this crazy lights up in the sky. I'm like, okay, really?
I've noticed like in my job, like we park golf carts, and there's a way that sort of like the 45-year-old to 55-year-olds park the carts, and a way us younger guys park the carts. Yep. There's like a pattern difference there. Yep. And so like Mark Millar and Brian K. Vaughan kind of being around the same age, I think that certain generations have their isms that are uniquely their own.
Right? It's just like certain generations, you can always tell the difference between the guys that grew up watching the original Star Wars movies in theaters versus the guys who grew up watching like the prequels in theaters. You can always tell. It's so apparent every single time.
Yeah. It's hilarious how that works. But, that's about it. I don't want to spoil anything for our viewers or risk repeating or sort of, what would be the term? Yeah. Watering down any of my previous sentiments.
The only thing that I'll kind of leave it off on in my final point is, oh my God, Josh Duhamel can actually act. Not that, I shouldn't say that. Not that I've ever really had a problem with Josh Duhamel. It's just that I feel like outside of my beloved Transformers movies, which again, we will get to at a certain point, and also shout out to Lorenzo Di Bonaventura, another one of those guys that is one of the greatest Hollywood producer names ever. Like, that's just a name that, like, whenever I saw it come up, I'm like, that's a guy who is meant to be working in movies, And he produced all of my beloved Transformers movies, and all of which Josh Duhamel was in, which kind of makes sense as far as the casting goes. But like the thing that immediately showed me, as far as I'm like, wow, as far as the guy, like the last guy who I was expecting to like kind of lead this cast, he's actually really good at it, and he's actually doing a really good job. But like Ben Daniels as the brother, and obviously Matt Lanter, and also Leslie Bibb as the wife, in a fantastic come full circle moment for her, since she was originally the reporter who obviously first got down and dirty with Tony Stark in the first Iron Man movie. I feel like this is a perfect come full circle moment for her, And so we're seeing all these different, and also fun fact, the guy who voices Darkstar is the guy who played Sabretooth in the first X-Men movie. Like, they're like, this property definitely like has its allusions to like previous comic book and like nerd property. So I definitely think that as far as it doing its homework, I definitely think it's definitely doing its homework. But Josh Duhamel like impressed the shit out of me as far as acting wise go. I'm like, wow, he's actually like playing a character, and he's actually like works really well for this part.
And my closing thoughts as well for my side of the fence. I was burnt out on superheroes, superhero sickness, superhero Stockholm, really.
Superhero fatigue, I believe, is the official pop culture Twitter term for it.
I was, my frustration was misplaced, because this past month span of all the shows that have been coming out and what we've been covering seemed not fun to me going into it. And I've just completely refound my love for superheroes and comic book stories. And Jupiter's Legacy is a part of that. While it's not perfect, I think it's at least worth a watch, guys.
Yes,
I'll leave it there.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. While I do not think necessarily that I'm not going to give my star ratings yet, because I've only seen 3 episodes. You've only seen 4, so I don't think that's fair. So we'll save that for the end of the week when we hit this on the variety show. But I definitely say that while Jupiter's Legacy certainly embodies certain problems that we have from a production standpoint, from a superhero standpoint, I think it's doing everything that it needs to do as far as continuing to take the genre in bold, new, different directions too. So with that being said, those are our thoughts on Jupiter's Legacy. Let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. Let us know how much of the show you've watched. Let us know if you're one of those insane people that stayed up until 3 a.m. when it dropped and watched all 8 episodes at once. If you are, props to you is all that I have to say. I will not do that much damage to my body, but to each his own. Let us know in the comment section below. Be sure to click the subscribe button. Click the bell next to the subscribe button. Click the like button, because that always helps us as far as, just the YouTube algorithm goes. And be sure to follow us on our Facebook and Instagram at Talkin' TV Podcast. It's right over there as far as that goes, so it should be super easy to spell. Chris, where can the good people find you on the internet?
They can find me anywhere that matters, as I like to say. It's really all the major platforms at Christian Evanko. Evanko spelled E-V-A-N-K-O. That's my last name. Please wear it out. I'd love for you to use the link in my bio. Click that as many times as you want to find the music I make. Working on a bunch of new tunes, but I really love and pride myself on my back catalog and sort of get to know my origin story before I release new music this year. So hit that link in my bio, check out my music, head down to Spotify, Apple, all that stuff's in there. I make it nice and easy, put it for you in one place. And while you're in that link in my bio, I have another podcast called Talkin' with Andrew and Chris. Talkin' spelled the same way we do it here on the Talkin' TV podcast. TALKIN. That's a show about life, music, and everything in between. We post episodes a couple times a month. It's a riot, and I hope to see you guys there. Dom, what about you, man? Where can they find you and keep up to date with your happenings and goings-ons? That's how I'll word it.
With my happenings and comings and going, posting trailers on my Instagram at Movie Nerd Reviews and making sarcastic Facebook posts at Movie Nerd Reviews as well. Eventually, I will have something actually fully written that I can share with you guys if you guys can actually set aside, some time in order to actually, read. I know that's a deadly trap word in today's internet age, but I swear it will hopefully be worth it. I'm actually working on a really cool story idea right now about a vampire who is kind of a schlub and doesn't want to be a vampire.
Have you written more of that?
Because Twilight has a little bit. I wrote a little bit of a subplot involving where he runs into a ghost played by Jason Alexander. I'm not quite sure about where I want to take it, but I was watching this movie that I was in on Netflix that was absolute garbage, and I'm like, I can write a better ghost story than that.
I still have the document shared. Can I read that at some point? Cool.
Absolutely. Read
Follow Dom, guys, because I'm compelled by the story, and I think you guys would be too if it ever sees the light of day. That's for sure.
I'm glad that you were. My whole thing is, I'm like, look, if just I don't even care if it. I'm like, I don't even care. I'm like, if people like it, if I can just sell it and just be and like somehow have it be made, even if Hollywood completely does what it does and completely bastardizes it, I'll be happy as far as that goes. So follow me all there on Facebook and Instagram at Movie Nerd Reviews. And as always, people remember, 12 seasons in a short film, and watch more fucking movies. We'll see you guys next time.